But businesses have to shift their thinking that like different stages, you need different levels of partners, and you need to have the resources to bring those partners on and give them what they need to succeed. There are these businesses that want to grow really quickly and then sell. That's a whole different model. And usually you have a ton of money to back that. But if you're a business that's thinking long-term, marketing needs to be thought about in long-term. The strategy does shift based on different types of businesses, where you are, what market you're in. Like you need to have some sort of strategy for the goal you're trying to go to. Otherwise, you're just throwing things at a wall. You have nothing to compare it.
What's up, aspiring CMOs? This episode is very special today because I might be considering changing my career. Today, I met with a very interesting person, Behdad, who is also the founder of CG Marketing. We're going to talk about marketing matchmaking, where business owners can find the right marketing agency to help their product campaigns and sales.
Businesses also think they only need to hire one marketing partner to solve their problem. But as you're scaling, like you're going from like 7 or 8 figures or low 8 figures and up, what the biggest shift that happens is you actually go from using very general partners, very general agencies, very general types of employees to very specialized types of employees based on like specific channels that you really need to get working.
So those of you who want to become a chief marketing officer, keep listening. Today, we're going to talk about something really cool, which is marketing matchmaking. And let's get into the episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Aspiring CMO podcast. Today, I have Behdad with me. Hi, B, how are you?
Hi, good. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Before we dive into the podcast, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Of course. I'll give you the 1-minute background that I usually give. So my background, I used to be an engineer. Most people don't know that. And I used to work for a company back in Canada called TELUS, a big telecom company. And I used to work on the B2B side of things. So typically working with like mid-sized customers, understanding what's happening from like a C-level perspective, IT perspective, and then building out roadmaps for those companies. How do you get from A to B to C? And so that's where a lot of my business consulting, sales, leadership, and technology experience came from. But what you're more interested about is the marketing side. And so I ended up coming into the marketing world, building out websites, doing Google ads, doing SEO for small businesses, very quickly realizing I didn't like doing 80-hour websites on the weekend. And I got paid very well as a sales engineer in the 6 figures. So I was like, I don't need to make a couple extra $1,000 on the weekend. But as I started working with different partners in the marketing space, I started realizing most marketing agencies didn't really understand business, and most business people didn't really understand marketing. And so there's always this gap in the middle. And I thought that I could fill in the gap by just having 10 solid marketing partners, talking to businesses, see what they need, and then matching them with the right marketing partners. But over the last 5.5 years, I've talked to 891 different marketing agencies and partners one-on-one, and built a network of about 11% of those that I use to match with my customers. So essentially, I'm a marketing matchmaker and a broker.
That's not the most fun role. Like you get to talk to the marketers, but you also mingle with all the business owners, and you kind of just do this matchmaking. I definitely have never heard about this role before. I'm heavily considering changing right now, like from aspiring CMO to aspiring marketing matchmaker, the triple M.
Yes, there's a whole different thing.
Yes. So I know that this is also what motivated you to start CJAM, your marketing company, right?
Yeah.
Is to match these two people. What was the hardest part to get started to do that? Like, was it,
The hardest
did you
part
find this
is
difficult?
so the hardest part of matchmaking, just in general, like one, everyone knows how hard it is to start a business and get it to grow. I actually worked 2 jobs for the longest time as I was building up my business because I never wanted to put a lot of pressure in my business to make a certain amount of money or do a certain amount of things. I actually just did it because I enjoyed it. But the hardest part of matchmaking, when you're working in this space, you have businesses that are wanting to find the right marketing partners, but they're also growing, right? So you have these businesses that go from, let's say, making 5 figures to 6 figures to 7 to 8. Each one of these stages, businesses have to break, have to change processes, have to bring in new partners. And if you start thinking about that on the agency side as well, agencies are also businesses. And so they're also growing and breaking and doing all the same thing. And so you're essentially taking 2 broken entities and matchmaking them and hoping that they can help each other grow. And so getting that match right and getting better at that matchmaking, that's the hardest part. Whereas you could use typical things like marketplaces and different types of ways to find marketing partners today. Usually they have a sub 10% rate of actually being able to do things well and having a match that you actually like. Whereas with my service, it's about a 70% match. And I'm always trying to think of like, how do I get it to 80 to 90, adding other vetting systems and other resources so that my customers can continuously win from the first try.
That's amazing. I thought that this matchmaking usually, like people put the CMO into the role, and then the CMO's responsibility is to like find all these vendors. So for example, content or links or paid ads. So you're essentially replacing that role for the CMO, right? And then finding all these vendors for companies.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about just like the CMO role by itself, they don't have the network. right? Like unless they're working in a very specific industry and they've worked with very specific customers, they might have some vendors they can use, but their job is not to basically day in and day out make relationships in this space and vet agencies and that kind of stuff. And so typically when a CMO or a fractional CMO is looking for a partner, what do? They just tap into their current network. So you're only going to get what's within their network, or they're going on Google or some of these other platforms to find these partners, and they're not the best place to find them. And so what I do a lot of the times, I actually work with a bunch of different fractional CMOs that then ask me for recommendations of like, oh, Behdad, we're doing a branding project or a website project, or do you know someone for SEO? And I just basically help them with my network. So instead of a business paying a CMO multi-hundreds of dollars an hour to vet, like they can get the right partner and within a week. And so you're not wasting that time. And so they can think more strategically.
Amazing. Before you entered this role, were you doing any CMO roles as well? Like you did tell me before the episode, before we started the recording, is that yes, you could do a CMO role, but you decided not to.
Yeah.
Have you?
So my experience before, like when I was working as an engineer, I was basically talking to businesses, understanding what they need, and then building out technology road. What does a CMO do? Same thing. Understand what a business needs, what they're doing moving forward, and then building out a marketing roadmap. Right. I built my own business up, so I understand how branding works, how website works, how messaging works, how all the different channels work. I have all the partners for whatever is needed. So I could literally go into a company and go, okay, well, we need to figure out branding. Here's how we have to think about it. Here's the partners we bring in. Let's fix that. Then we bring in the website partner. So it's definitely possible for me just to move into a fractional CMO role. I don't think I'd be a full-time CMO. I'd like to do the fractional thing because I like to work with different businesses, but that's not where my heart lies. Like I really want to build out this like matchmaking business and continue improving on it and just focusing on that.
Yes. Okay. Amazing. What is the number one mistake people make when they trying to do this outreach or matchmaking by themselves? I wouldn't say matchmaking, but at least like when they look for partners or agencies to help their own businesses, like what is the number one mistake they make?
One of the biggest mistakes is just like not being ready on your side to take on the right marketing partner. A lot of the times people think like, oh, I'm going to hire a marketing agency and they're just going to take over everything so I can forget about marketing. But that's not how it works. Like whenever you hire a new employee, are you just like leaving it to them to figure things out? Like that's not how it works. You have to actually put in
But
time,
people
energy.
do that. People do that.
They do. I get it because your business is stressful. There's a lot of things going on. You're trying to figure out how to keep the lights on. So you're bringing on employees to reduce the load. But there's always that period of time that you need to train people, right? Like on your systems and processes and having the right SOPs and what your culture is, how you talk, like how you bring yourself across. You have to share all of these things. And to add to that, businesses also think they only need to hire one marketing partner to solve their problems. But as you're scaling, like if you're going from like 7 or 8 figures or low 8 figures and up, what the biggest shift that happens is you actually go from using very general partners, very general agencies, very general types of employees to very specialized types of employees based on like specific channels that you really need to get working, right? Like if social media is really important to you, you're going to hire a really high level social media person and not your average agency to run your social, right? And so that's how like businesses have to shift their thinking that like at different stages, you need different levels of partners and you need to have the resources to bring those partners on and give them what they need to succeed.
Okay. Interesting, because like in your answer right now, you were mostly mentioning like 7 to 8 figure businesses, but many businesses are not 7 figures yet. In fact, many people still struggle to build up their businesses to 7 figures. For
Yeah.
those smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses, do you generally recommend anything, or are you just gonna be like, okay, hire a good marketer, train them up,
No,
take
so
it back? I don't know.
so if you have a smaller business, if you're like in 5 figures, I probably wouldn't be hiring anyone. Maybe some freelancers to kind of offload some things, but you just don't have the budget, right? Like you still need to pay yourself and all that different type of stuff. Once you kind of get to like 6 figures, let's say like mid 6 figures, you're making $400 to $600, for $600,000 a year. At that point, you can start looking at a little bit more of the value-based agents. These are like agencies that are good at like 1 to 3 things that you need them to be good at. But then everything else they kind of just do off the side of the desk and it's done at an average rate. But that's okay because you're in that stage of business where you just need to move things and move the needle ahead. That's kind of like what I would think, and build a solid foundation. So when I'm talking about solid foundation, I'm saying have a really good website. Like at the end of the day, like a lot of businesses will go to conferences or they'll do different events or they'll go to different markets and all that different kind of stuff. Ultimately, it's all going to lead back to some sort of foundational communication engine. And usually that's your website. It can also be your social media profiles and things like that. But like dial in the foundational stuff, which is usually one-time projects, so that you don't lose credibility when people come back to your website or your social media profiles where they want to connect further, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So you think that foundational part should be done in-house, or is that something people should outsource?
No, you can definitely
to
outsource parts of it, right? Like, so if you're doing a website, like I would outsource the copywriting, unless you have copywriters in house, figure out what resources you have in house. But I would hire a copywriter. I'd hire a person to look at the SEO of the website before I actually build it and tell me what keywords I need for my web page. And then I'd hire a designer and developer to build out the website. And usually I like to do that with an agency because they'll literally have it usually wrapped up in like one neat bow that you can pay for. Rather than trying to bridge it yourself because it takes a lot of time and energy on your end as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Amazing. I think that was a really cool insight right on the beginning of this episode. Like, when should people look at specialized agencies and at what range? So usually, so what I'm getting is that most of your clients are a seven figure above, right? The people you're dealing with.
Yeah, so most of my customers are like scaling, but I do get the businesses that come in and say, "Hey, Behdad, I need a website done. Like, who do you trust and who do you recommend?" Because a lot of times, like when you're first starting out, like you might hire a website development agency and they're getting all their work done outsourced, but it's all templated based, and you just have no idea. You think it's done custom, right? So there's a lot of people that lie about what they give and they just charge a lower price point. And then let's say you spent $5,000 on a website, but then in a year you have to redo it because things weren't done well. So I do work with smaller customers when there's like set projects and they have the budget for, let's say, building out a website. But the main customer that I typically work with are the ones that are scaling and they're going, we need the right partners in place because we're trying to get to that next level of business.
I see. I see. Hi, if you listen to this far, thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave me a review on either Apple Podcast, Spotify, or my YouTube channel. If you have any feedback for the show, please let me know on the Aspiring CMO Podcast social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, or send me an email on my website. Now, let's get back to the episode. How do you vet the partners then? Do you have a team to do that for you, or is that something you do by yourself through networking? Or
Yeah, so my vetting process has multiple steps. A lot of the stuff I'm still doing, like I said, I've met with over 891 different marketing agencies and partners over the last 5 years. So the first step is always an initial call to get a sense of like the agency, how they kind of got into their place, what their main products are, their services, and what level they do things at. If I think like, okay, after this first call, this might be actually a good agency, then I ask them for a whole bunch of stuff. So I go, okay, you told me you do websites, or you told me you do Google ads, or you told me you do SEO. Like, I need to see these things. Can you show me these procedures that you have in place? Can you show me the type of template documents you use to give to customers? What does your reporting look like? I go through all that stuff. And once I go, okay, this agency looks like they're good, then I have a whole other like 1 hour to 1.5 hour deep dive with them where I go through about 30 to 35 questions to understand their agencies inside and out. And after, if all of that looks good, then they're moved into the partner network. I have two different lists. One of those is a partner network, and then I have a secondary network for people that aren't a fit yet. And so that's kind of how I build out my vetting process. And I now also give my customers even reference guides, like so reference check guides, where I say, hey, this is the agency that I recommend. Some of my agencies I've worked with like 10 to 15 times, so I know how good they are and we're good. But sometimes I've had agencies that I've vetted, but I haven't used yet. And so
yeah.
I'll give my customers reference guides to basically go through references and ask questions to make sure my customer feels comfortable with who they're about to hire.
And usually, when the two meet, do you still have to do any further communication to make sure that they work well, or is that something like, okay, you guys met, I'm out?
Yeah, so usually what happens is I'll make the intro. So on both sides, I'll make an intro. They'll have a call. The customer will decide if they want to work with the partner or not. And then I'm in kind of in the background, like in like on the first checkpoint, it's around 2 months. I go, hey, how are things going? Have they done what they've said to do? Is the onboarding done well? Anything you're happy with? Anything you're not happy with? Just so I can get a sense of like if that match is working well. And then the customers always have an open door to me, so they can always reach out and say, hey, B, something's not working, or hey, this is working really well. Like you should know this. And so I have a lot of feedback that comes to me through that. And I like to build relationships with my customers, so I do like to.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love. I can get the vibe from you that you're really a friendly person who keeps up good communication. So I'm pretty sure that your clients are happy with your work and stuff. One thing I want to touch on is I also work with an agency, right? And we also have like a proposal process, and I know other agency owners, and everybody does it differently. But sometimes the proposal is different and the delivery is different. What's your comment on that? Like, could you
Yeah,
comment on?
you'll get that a lot. I would say like 90% of marketing agencies are not very good. And so that's like a large amount of people that will do really well in the sales presentation. They have salespeople, but on the back end, you actually need to know who's working on your account. That's one of the biggest things I would tell business owners is, hey, if you're getting a really good presentation and it looks like it's very, very polished, the next thing I would ask is, can I meet the team that's going to be working on my project, right? Like if you go from like really senior people to very junior people, then you know it's going to be a problem. But you want to make sure that the people that are actually working on your account, you're getting to. And so that way it kind of bypasses that sales presentation. And the one other thing is there's a lot of agencies that are started because there's executors that used to work in marketing agencies, like the people who used to run things at a very high level. They now run agencies, but they don't know how sales works. And so they're not as polished on the sales front, but they know what they're talking. So if you're trying to hire like very specialized type people, you might not want to expect like really good sales presentations. You might actually expect someone that's just like down to earth, is a bit of a geek. I'm a bit of a geek and I love it. Those are the types of people you want to hire because they know what they're doing and they actually care about their craft and they nerd out over it, which is what you're looking for.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a two side of a coin because I also noticed that people who are very nerdy, taking action with them is a lot slower. So because they are so perfectionist, they are trying to delay things just to make sure things are perfect. And I also see that on some clients that they are frustrated because they're like, okay, why is it not done? And as a nerdy agency, because we are an SEO agency, right? Like it's not done yet because we need time. So
Yeah.
I do see that frustration sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring a good point. It's all about the balance, right? Like if you're in the start part of your business where you're like growing, you need things to move quickly, you need to test things quickly, like that totally makes sense. But as you get like bigger and you're like, we're spending, $100,000 a month, like we need to be very focused on making sure that like we have someone that's really focused on making things work, right? At that point, it's like, okay, I'm okay, like letting go a little bit of the speed to make sure that we are actually much more accurate in what we do. But there's always that balance you have to.
Yes, yes, yes. Amazing. Have you ever had like a bad experience where you were convinced that the agency will do well, but kind of they didn't do well for your clients? What had that happened before? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not perfect. Matchmaking is not perfect.
Yeah.
So there are situations where that does happen. And typically the way I handle those situations is I'll talk to the customer, understand what's happening from their side, and then I'll talk to the agency and also understand what's happening from their side. And then you kind of have a picture of like why it didn't work. Like, was it actually the agency? Was it the business? Was it a mixture of the two? A lot of the times it comes down to communication, right? And expectation setting. And so in those scenarios, I kind of take the learning away and I end up moving forward. I have customers that will go through those scenarios and say, hey, B, that first relationship didn't work. Do you have another recommendation for me? And so they know that like this is a process that might take one or two tries. Usually it takes a business 3 to 6 tries before they find one agency that they like. Not just with me. I mean, like if they were doing it themselves. With me, typically I can get it right 70% of the time on the first try. Whereas if people are trying to do it by themselves, it's the percentage is easily under 10% of the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it could be that the agency is great, but the person who handles the account is a dick, and then they just like they don't like each other. That could be
Yeah.
also a thing,
Yeah.
right? Like I can see how personalities can clash, and no matter how good the product or service is, they just can't work. But I guess it's part of the game. So basically, if a company is 7+ figures up, they will be having multiple agencies or multiple channels. Is that it? So like for someone who is learning to on this marketing journey, I want to ask this question for them mostly. So those companies would have a separate agency for PPC. Would they have a separate agency for SEO, a separate agency for, I don't know, creative video marketing? Maybe is that how it works?
Yes. So okay, this is a very complex and like question because there's so many different ways you can puzzle piece it together. That's kind of why I
Okay.
have the network that I have is because sometimes you'll have a business come in and they need, let's say, PPC, SEO, social media, and video editing, right? A lot of the times that would be 2 or 3 agencies. But when you're working with me, I'm like, okay, well, look, this agency actually does the paid ads and SEO. This agency is only really good at the social media, and then this agency is only really good at the video edit. Or, hey, we have a paid ads partner that has a video editing team, but they don't do SEO. So we have to bring in a different SEO partner to fit it in. So a lot of times it's puzzle piecing what the agencies are actually good at and how they're built for what the customer actually needs. And so usually when a customer gets an email from me, I say, well, look, these are the services that they're actually good at. So if you hire this agency, you need to hire for this and this because this agency doesn't do that. When you're looking for this yourself as a business or a CMO, you have no idea what people are actually good at. And so they'll say they're good at everything. And the number of times I've been on calls with marketing agencies and they'll show me a deck and they'll say, we do these 9 services. And I go, listen, I've talked to over 800 agencies at this point. I know you don't do 9 services. Which ones do you actually do well? Because if my customers come back upset, I'm never going to send a customer to you again. And so they go, well, B, these are the 3 that we actually do well. The other 6 we don't, but we don't tell our customers that. Like in verbatim, I've heard that.
That's amazing. I mean, I get it. I come from agency background. I get it. I can say like we do 10 million things, but in reality, I could change the numbers a little bit. But yeah, like another episode of mine recently on this podcast too, I talked to an efficiency coach, and he told me the same thing, that most digital marketing agencies are not specialized at all. Like every digital marketing agency is trying to do it all so the client is happy. So, like I totally understandable if you have an agency and you kind of know, SEO well on page, then eventually you will have to offer link building services and so forth. So,
Yeah.
or content or all three or whatever. So
Or you'll hear
I
the
understand that.
or you'll hear the SEO agency that say, "Oh, we do some of the technical stuff, we do on-page stuff, but no, we don't do the off-page stuff. It's not that important. Like content is king." I'm like, you can't do SEO if you don't have the backlinking aspects of it. And usually what SEO agencies will say that is because one, they don't want to build out either that partnership network to do it, or they don't want to build out that side of the business to do it. And so they just change the way that they say things in sales. So they're like, "Oh, it's not that important," but it really is important. They just don't have the infrastructure to build it out. And so that's like a red flag typically for me when someone says, "We only do these things, but this one doesn't matter." It's like, or they say it does matter, but we haven't built that out. And so that way I bring in like a backlinking agency to fulfill that part if they choose to work with that agency.
Yes, amazing. Yeah, this is must be part of your craft because it's so hard. Like just the way you explained like how to put the pieces together. Like I know it was a very simple way to explain it. It's just in reality it must be very hard because I guess there's a budgeting aspect to it yet we haven't even touched on. Like maybe your client comes with like, "Hey, B, I only have like 10 grand to spend. What do I do?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, so budget's a thing, the size of the business is the thing, the number of internal resources they have is a thing, their personality and what they want to do, their growth goals, like all of these things play together. And for me, a lot of what I do up front is consult them and just say, "Hey, look, based on what you're trying to do, here's kind of what the roadmap looks like, and here's where you need to bring your expectation down, and here's where you need to." No one really talks to businesses that way when it comes to marketing. And the other thing that businesses need to have in their minds, or CMOs, which I'm sure they do, is it's a long term, right? Like there are these businesses that want to grow really quickly and then sell. That's a whole different model. And usually you have a ton of money to back that. But if you're a business that's thinking long term, marketing needs to be thought about in long term. And so most people, for example, will try a channel for 3 months. But I have a business that's doing, 7 figures now, and they're about 3.5, 4 years in, and they used one channel to grow it all. And so I was like, what is the channel that you got to this point? And they're like, "Well, email marketing. We do a lot of outbound." I was like, "Cool. How long did it take you to figure out outbound?" They said it took them 2 years, 2 years of A/B testing, trying different markets, trying different messaging till they figured it out. And then once it hit, they were able to scale it. And so my question for a lot of people that are probably listening is like, how long did you run a marketing channel before you just stopped it? And how much were you testing? And the answer to that probably is maybe I tried it for 2 to 3 months and then I cut it because it wasn't working. But have you tried something for 2 years? Probably not, because the flywheel takes time to take effect.
Yes, that's a great takeaway. Like organic marketing especially does take time. I guess with PPC there's a better aspect, like money in and money out. Like it's a little bit faster, but you need a lot of resources to back it up to run successful PPC campaigns.
Yeah, and
Um,
if you think about the PPC, like sure, if you're doing search, that's one thing. But if you start doing like YouTube, a part of that, you start doing photos, you're trying to figure out the messaging. You need to have a certain amount of money that you're putting in so that the algorithm is giving you enough data back so that you can actually make changes fast enough. And a lot of people don't think about that either. They think, okay, well, I'm going to put in $1,000 or $2,000 into Google Ads, and it should work. Like, why am I not getting things? Because you don't want to have enough data coming back at you to refine that algorithm fast enough so that you are actually making that money back in 2 to 3 months. And so that also requires testing, but it's just in a different way.
How do you help your clients to determine what channel will work for them?
It
Do
depends on
you
their
test a
goals.
lot of stuff?
Yeah, it depends on, yeah, I go through a lot of questions with business owners. Like typically I do about 30 minutes to an hour of like a consulting session up front, and try to figure out every aspect where they're trying to head. And based on their goals and where they're at, it's like, okay, well, these are the channels that makes the most sense. But then sometimes I go and I'm like, okay, well, you've already built a business. What you're missing is like a marketing strategy. That's where the CMOs come into play, where I'm like, yeah, it's not just about churning on another channel. It's about how do you unify all of these channels together. And as a business owner, if you're just running it as a business owner with like a marketing director or a junior marketing director, you're not going to be able to figure that stuff out and piece all the pieces together. And so in those scenarios, my recommendation is bring in a fractional CMO, build out a strategy, have that fractional CMO find the people to basically plug into that strategy, whether it's in-house or outsourced resources, and then run with it. And then use that person as a strategic advisor, and then hire a marketing director and now run with that strategy that's in place. that's the most ideal way that you're going to be able to scale.
I see. I see that many marketing strategies, though, some of them comes from like endless testing. But what you in your answer, it sounded like that each and every business has its own unique strategy.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And the strategy does shift based on different types of businesses, where you are, what market you're in. Like you need to have some sort of strategy for the goal you're trying to go to. Otherwise, you're just throwing things at a wall. You have nothing to compare it. Like even with that strategy, there is a ton of testing that's done. Just because you have a strategy doesn't mean the testing's done. It's just like this is the marketing strategy. Based on the marketing strategy, now we're going to start doing testing within this so that we have something to measure.
Okay. So could you give us an example, maybe recently one of your clients without mentioning any business name? Like how did you approach their marketing strategy to make sure that they hire the right vendors?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the customers that I had in the e-commerce space, they were doing about 10 to 15 million a year, closer to the $10 million a year mark.
Wow.
Um, but they were running it themselves. Like they were just like, they just threw a bunch of things at the wall. The business has been around for a while, right? Like it wasn't a new business, but for them, you could tell like they had no marketing strategy in place. And so I was like, listen, the first step we're going to take is bring in a fractional CMO. They're going to kind of work with you to figure out where you're at currently today, what channels make sense, what strategies make sense. And then from there, they're going to help run those. And so once they had the strategy in place, they went, well, we need an SEO person. We need an email marketing person. We need someone for retention. We need someone to help with videos. And we need a web dev person because now that we want to build out the SEO strategy, we need a bunch of stuff changed. Like, and then I help support with the different partners that they can put into place. I was just talking to that customer recently. They're doing about $18 million now. This is a year and a half later. And he goes, without that fractional CMO, I would not have been able to focus on the strategy of my business. Like all the marketing stuff he heads and just talks to me about. And it saves so much time in mental brain space and capacity for them to continuously test new stuff out. And it's funny, just this morning, he sent me another email saying, hey, we're looking for a TikTok ad agency because we want to start playing around with TikTok Shop. And so now we're going to help support them with that too. And the marketing fractional CMO is going to run with it.
Okay, so for that specific e-com store, by the way, this is like amazing growth. They almost doubled it in
It's
from
crazy.
10 to 18, right? 80 million.
Yeah. And a massive aspect of that was like SEO. Like their SEO like skyrocketed like 3-4x once the
So
strategies.
through that fractional CMO, basically, he came in or she came in and said, okay, guys, it's going to be SEO.
So they came in, built out a strategy and said, these are the channels we're going to try. SEO was one of the channels.
Yeah.
And that fractional CMO specifically used to be an engineer. And he actually looks at like numbers like no other. So everything he makes decisions on are based on numbers. And so the CEO loves working with that fractional CMO because he looks at everything. Everything's KPI based. Everything is metric based. Money in, money out. He like looks at all of it. And that's what's helped them grow, right? And so once SEO does work, you double down on it, right?
I understand. That's crazy. How about other service-based businesses? Many people on my podcast so far had talked about Shopify stores, but how would you approach a service-based business?
They're very different. Like there's so many different strategies. Like I have one customer, he actually has 5 different businesses, but at the time that we spoke, he only talked about one business. And the business was directly targeting personal injury lawyers. Like that's his target market because his service was he takes personal injury lawyers as clients to and from appointments and to different things like that. So like, you know, when you get injured, you shouldn't be driving because your back hurts and stuff. So he has a service where he will drive the clients from one place to another. So, and who they target is personal injury lawyers because that's who their clients are. And so he came to me and said, hey, look, like it's really hard targeting personal injury lawyers. I'd love some like ideas. And so we actually decided that social media might be a channel. Like I went and talked with a bunch of different partners, got a bunch of different ideas. And one of my social media agencies came back and like, hey, we could probably target this audience in a few different ways. One is with just organic social media, but number 2 is we can help them build out a podcast, kind of like you have, to bring in your like specific ICP. And so he actually started just interviewing personal injury lawyers on his podcast, plus his social media account. He's been working with that social media agency for almost 3 years now because of like, it's just worked for him. And then he came back to me during just near the tail end of COVID because he was a pharmacist. And so there was this like offer that came for about 5 months where if people could get free COVID testing through insurance and stuff, like he would just get paid if someone got free COVID testing kits. And he's like, B, I need basically influencer marketing. I need someone to help with like blowing this up on ads. And I need as many influencers as possible. And I said, well, I also have like a Google Ads guy that I can share with you and a conversion rate optimization guy I can share with you to improve on this landing page that you have. In the course of that 5 months, I literally have him on video saying, we did about 10 million in revenue and 3 million in profit.
No. Wow.
And like he's been now using that 3 million to deploy across his other 3 businesses. So like just like having the right resource at the right time for what you're doing, and you have the right offer, like, and add in the marketing broker that can give you the right people at the right time, like that's the kind of stuff that you can do.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I still cannot wrap my head around like personal injury lawyers, because your service is to help those lawyers' clients.
Yeah.
How twisted is that? Don't you think?
It's
Like,
it's an
it's a bit.
interesting niche.
Yeah,
It's an interesting niche.
yeah. Wow. My one of my friend works for a shower head company. That also was weird for me, but that was a little bit more straightforward. Like they sell
Yes.
shower heads, but this one, wow. So it was. I can imagine some creative ads, but then it can directly target the person who has an injury, not the lawyer. But I don't know what how would the creative ad look like for a lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, they're running social, like organic social, right? So they're doing organic social content, and then they run the podcast, which brings on the personal injury lawyer to talk about their practice and what they do and how they were successful. But then that creates the conversation later to be like, hey, look, this is a service that we have. Is that of interest to you?
Yeah. Yes. Podcasting is great, honestly. Like, I just love it for just in general, but like I can see it from for other businesses that it pays off, just by having the networking going through. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's very cost effective too to run a podcast. It's not difficult. Yeah.
No, no, you really just need like a video editor or someone to cut videos up for you, and then buy the soft. Like you have two softwares. You have Riverside, and I'm assuming
Yes.
you have another one that just puts it everywhere on the web, and that's basically it.
Exactly. So that's all. Let's talk about CMO role. So I'm not gonna forget this question, because before we started the recording, you mentioned that many people call themselves a CMO, even though they are not a CMO yet. So my question is, what does a CMO mean? And how come people are messing this term up a little bit too much?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the way that I see a CMO as is someone that's actually worked in like a VP type position in a company as a CMO. And there's like two different types. There's ones that have worked with like smaller startup businesses, or like kind of like on the smaller end. That kind of CMO is different than a CMO that works for a large organization. So let's say you have a CMO that works for like Fortune 100 companies and up. That type of CMO usually is waiting for things to happen, and then they react to the things that happen. So things are coming in their email, and they're organizing kind of what makes sense and prioritizing what makes sense. So it's a very much like like information coming to you, organizing, and then being strategic back. But if you're working as a CMO of a smaller type company, like let's say a startup or someone that's like in the 7-figure range and they're trying to grow, that's a different type of CMO where you almost have to roll up your sleeves as well. You can't wait for things to happen. You have to make things happen. You have to be proactive around building out the strategy, doing the SOPs, maybe doing some of the work yourself, but like building out the team. Like there's so much of a different approach that you need to be when you're that type of CMO. So there's like the two levels, and then there's the different skill sets. So on one
Yeah.
side, you have CMOs that are really good at like branding and messaging and building out all of that type of stuff. And then you have CMOs that are really good at like growth marketing. So they understand the different channels that they need to run. Some might be really strong at like affiliate or SEO or just different areas of marketing. And then I call these unicorns, but they're really, really, really hard to find, are CMOs that have done A to B, where they know how to do the messaging and all the different aspects, and they know how to fit it within growth. Typically, these CMOs are very industry focused, and they're not typically all over the place. They're very like, we know how to do this type of work for these types of companies. So it's like you have multiple different types of CMOs. You just have to know what you're looking for based on the type of business you're in.
I think that's a great summary, and thank you for summarizing this for me, for someone who is an aspiring CMO. I think that was like I should have just started with this episode as episode number 1, like just to clear out all the confusion around the CMO role. When was the instance when you have bumped into someone who claimed themselves to be a CMO, but you could tell like they were not, maybe they were not ready, or like
Yeah,
what told you, what was the telling point?
there's a few. So one example would be someone comes and says, "Hey, I'm a CMO. I just recently left my full time job. A lot of people got let go, unfortunately, recently because of just what's happening in the tech world and all that other type of stuff. And so you have people that have actually been like, say, marketing directors or just like executors that are like, oh, I'm a CMO, but it's like, no, you never played that strategic role. You did execute on different types of things, but you can't call yourself a CMO because you haven't played that role up there. Or you also get people that are, hey, I'm a CMO, but I also own an agency. That's like the biggest red flag for me. I'm like, okay, so you were an agency owner before. All of a sudden, you see that people are looking for fractional CMOs. So now you're calling yourself a CMO, but really you're selling the services that your agency does. So you don't know anything outside of that. And most of those agencies, like let's say they're paid ads or an SEO, but they don't know all the other pieces from like branding to market research to positioning to building out the website to affiliate marketing. Like they don't touch any of that stuff. They never have. And so there's a lot of agency owners that call themselves fractional CMOs, but they don't have the breadth of experience needed to be a
Oh.
CMO.
Okay, so for example, like let's say I'm owning a link building agency, which is like a really small market of marketing. Like it's so tiny compared to
Yeah.
video marketing, I would say. And I just show up to you saying like, "Yep, also CMO, but I also own a link agency, whatever.com." Like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be like, okay, well, you do link building, you call yourself a fractional CMO. What customers have you worked with that you've done brand strategy and websites for, and then you like shifted that into growth? And typically the answer will, not many. Like typically I focus on like this piece. I'm like, well, then that's not really a fractional CMO. Your job as a fractional CMO is to do what's right for the customer. And typically it's build out a proper strategy, figure out your messaging, and then move forward from there on whatever growth channels make sense for the customer, not what you understand.
Yes, yes, because then, yeah, of course, there's a conflict of interest there. And you mentioned the other aspect is like some people, like many people, have been let go over last year in the tech space, and they were marketing directors or claimed themselves to be a CMO. What they, as you said, they didn't do that role yet. Like what? Then what did they do then in that previous tech company?
It would depend. Like if you're a marketing director, you might be working on one piece of the puzzle. Like when it comes to
Okay,
like the actual product, right? Like you're not looking at the whole infrastructure of like how everything's working together. You might be on like one part of the team that focuses on just like, outbound marketing, right? Or maybe on another team that's just focusing on inbound marketing, or you're just on the SEO team, or you're just on the, video and creative team. Like, but you're not looking at the whole function.
I see. I
Um,
see.
that's kind of
Hmm.
like what
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Second to last question, I guess, is if you were to give an advice to someone who is going on a roadmap to become a CMO, like with all your knowledge, all your networking experiences, what would be like a reasonable roadmap for someone to take a current marketing role and take it to a CMO level?
Yeah, if you want to be a CMO, I think that's a different question. Like if you're talking about like being a fractional CMO, I think that's where more my skill set is. I would say one, either take courses or build out like structures and templates and a system that you can apply to your different customers. Yeah, things can be custom, but like just having a foundation there is important. And just being like very transparent with your customers around what your capabilities and your skill sets are. You can grow into roles, of course. Like you don't need to know absolutely everything, but I think the biggest part is just being super transparent with people up front so that you're not setting these high expectations of what you're capable of doing and then it just misses the boat and then customers end up being upset because a lot of the times fractional CMOs or CMOs are not cheap, right? And a lot of the times businesses can't make mistakes multiple times and still survive, right? So you have to think about it in terms of those senses. And so once you've built out like the foundational structure of like how you work with people and what you're good at, and you're really ready to be able to do all the different testing and having the capabilities of hiring the right partners and moving a business forward, and then I think that's kind of like the roadmap, right? Like you just have to kind of like test. Don't charge a ton if you don't know if you can really solve the problem, like in a high confidence level, right?
Okay, okay. I guess it was a little bit broad, but I would say what I'm drawing out is that if somebody is starting in marketing, then experience as many different roles and then see what you like most, double down on that, and then you can become a fractional CMO once you
Yeah,
have
like I mean,
doubled
there's
down that
there's
skill set.
courses, there's things, but like you need to have the experience before you go
Yeah.
in. And sometimes like you might not have the experience, but just don't pretend you have it, right? Like just be like, hey, this is kind
Hmm.
of where I'm at. Like just be transparent and upfront about it. Like when I first started my business, I wasn't charging anywhere near what I'm charging now, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's because that's just my skill set was there. And I know some people will say charge more than what you're worth and all that different type of stuff, but it's just for me authentically, it's like I want to be able to help people. And I want to help people in the most authentic way possible. And so just being transparent about what's possible, what you're capable of doing, and just not overcharging for what your skill set is.
All right. Yes, yes. I think so. Like in this, like life when people have many many choices, the best thing you can do is to be authentic and just say the truth, right? Like people can find out stuff very quickly, I think.
We'll figure it
um
out fast.
yes. My last question though, B, I'm so thankful that you have joined the show today, is if you were to go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
There's two pieces of advice. The one that I would give the most is one, enjoy the process because the like just enjoy the process. Like the journey is the most important part. The outcome really does not matter. Like we all think that once we hit an outcome, like we'll get what we want. And we know time and time again that that's not true. So just enjoy the process of what you're going through, and follow what makes you happy. That's number one. And the second one would be like, just don't ignore your emotions. Like fully, like as you go through these processes, you're going to get emotions from all different senses. The biggest part to becoming kind of fulfilled and happy, I think, is just really understanding who you are, how you feel all the time. So learning how to like balance and understand your emotions, I think is also another really important thing that I would try to share with my younger self.
That's amazing. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. And if people would like to reach out to you, how can they find you?
The best way, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on Behdad Jamshidi. I'm there quite often, or through my website at www.cjammarketing.com. And if you also go on that website, at the bottom in the footer, there's a bunch of resources for different businesses and things like that around how to vet marketing agencies and the questions to ask. And those are probably the best ways to connect.
Amazing. Amazing. So thank you, B, so much for joining the show. And I hope to see you in person someday. Yeah.
Awesome. It was really nice to meet you as well. And thanks for having me.